The internet just cracked in half, and what spilled out is the kind of secret that makes Hollywood go silent. Late last night, a notorious online personality dropped a bomb so volatile, insiders say phones started ringing before the video even finished uploading. One legendary entertainment mogul. One long-standing marriage everyone thought was untouchable. And one family connection that allegedly explains why everything imploded behind closed doors. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't shade. This was framed as the truth nobody was supposed to hear out loud. Sources claim the moment the clip went live, private group chats exploded, lawyers were alerted, and longtime friends scrambled to distance themselves. Because according to the allegation, the real reason the marriage collapsed wasn't money, fame, or growing apart. It was something far more disturbing, far more personal, and far more explosive than anyone was prepared for. A secret dynamic hidden in plain sight. Boundaries blurred. Warning signs ignored. And a final discovery that allegedly broke the family from the inside out. Within minutes, old interviews resurfaced. Innocent moments suddenly felt eerie. Fans rewatched scenes with fresh eyes, catching pauses, glances, and comments that now felt loaded with meaning. Social media went feral. Hashtags climbed. Defenders screamed misinformation. Critics demanded answers. And at the center of it all sat one young woman whose name was suddenly everywhere, whether she asked for it or not. What makes this terrifying isn't just the allegation. It's the alleged receipts. Screenshots. Voice notes. Private conversations are said to exist and be circulating quietly among insiders like forbidden currency. And the scariest part. This was only the opening salvo. Because according to those close to the situation, what's already out is nothing compared to what's being held back. And once you hear what allegedly triggered the split, you'll never look at celebrity families the same way again. The moment the clip finished uploading, the story stopped belonging to the people at the center of it and became something far more dangerous. According to insiders, the fallout began within seconds. Phones lighting up. Group chats muting themselves. Assistants scrambling to confirm whether what was just said had crossed the line from rumor into irreversible exposure. Because the allegation wasn't framed as speculation. It was framed as something that had been hidden, protected, and deliberately ignored for years. Sources close to the family claim the marriage didn't collapse overnight. It eroded slowly, quietly, in ways outsiders could never see. Publicly, everything looked polished. United fronts. Anniversary posts. Business ventures expanding. But behind closed doors, tension was thick enough to suffocate. Arguments didn't start with shouting. They started with questions that never got answered. Long pauses. Deflections. A growing sense that something was wrong, but impossible to name without proof. Insiders say the first red flag wasn't dramatic. It was discomfort. A feeling that certain boundaries inside the household were being tested in subtle ways. Conversations that lingered too long. Emotional reliance that felt misplaced. A closeness that made people in the room exchange glances without saying a word. At first, it was rationalized. Blended families are complicated. Fame adds pressure. Everyone tried to believe it was harmless. But patterns don't stay invisible forever. According to multiple off-the-record accounts, the mogul began noticing shifts that couldn't be explained away. Energy changes when certain people entered the room. Defensive reactions to harmless questions. A protective instinct that kicked in without clear cause. Friends say she confided in a tight circle, asking if she was overthinking things. The answer she got back was always the same: trust your instincts, but don't accuse without evidence. That advice would haunt her. What allegedly cracked everything open wasn't confrontation. It was information. A device left unattended. A thread of messages that didn't read like casual check-ins. Not explicit, not graphic, but emotionally loaded in a way that raised alarms instantly. The tone was wrong. The familiarity was wrong. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Insiders claim she didn't react immediately. She watched. Waited. Cross-checked timelines. Compared notes with moments that had once felt off but insignificant. The more she looked, the more the picture sharpened. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment. It was an ongoing dynamic that had been allowed to grow unchecked under the same roof. Behind the scenes, the household became tense. Conversations grew clipped. Movement was monitored. Doors closed more often. People picked sides without saying they were picking sides. According to those close to the situation, the partner sensed the shift, but didn't know how much had already been uncovered. When questions finally came, they were met with minimization. Stress. Misinterpretation. Accusations of paranoia. That response only deepened the fracture. Friends say the mogul's heartbreak wasn't just romantic. It was maternal. Protective. Existential. The realization that something inside her family structure had gone wrong triggered a level of emotional collapse she'd never experienced before. Sleepless nights. Panic spirals. Private breakdowns she refused to let cameras capture. This wasn't content. This was survival. As tension escalated, communication reportedly broke down entirely. Attempts to address the issue turned into circular arguments that led nowhere. The partner allegedly insisted nothing inappropriate had happened, framing the closeness as misunderstood support. But the explanations didn't align with what had been seen, felt, and documented. Trust disintegrated faster than it could be repaired. Then came the quiet separation inside the home. Different schedules. Different rooms. Emotional distance so sharp it felt physical. According to insiders, that was the point of no return. The marriage may not have been officially over yet, but it was functionally dead. Everything after that was damage control. What the public didn't see was the internal reckoning. Legal consultations. Protective planning. Decisions made not out of anger, but fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of long-term consequences. Fear of what would happen if the wrong version of the story escaped first. And then, just when the family believed the situation might remain contained, the internet detonated. The online personality's video didn't introduce the allegation out of thin air, according to sources. It echoed whispers that had already been circulating quietly in industry circles. The reason it hit so hard was because it named the unspoken. It connected dots people were afraid to connect publicly. And it did so with confidence that suggested more information existed. As the clip spread, reactions were immediate and violent. Comment sections split down the middle. Some called it reckless. Others called it overdue. Old footage was pulled apart like evidence in a courtroom. Moments that once felt innocent were reinterpreted with new context. Social media timelines filled with theories, outrage, disbelief, and denial all at once. Behind the scenes, panic surged. According to insiders, emergency conversations were happening non-stop. What had been said publicly? What could still come out? Who else knew? And most importantly, how much could be disproven versus explained away? The mogul remained silent. That silence became its own statement. No denials. No clarifications. No vague privacy posts. Just absence. An absence, in a scandal like this, speaks volumes. Those closest to the situation say the silence wasn't a weakness. It was a strategy. Because what the public had heard was only the outer layer. The emotional truth was deeper. The documentation is more complex. And the choices she was preparing to make would change the narrative completely. As speculation reached a fever pitch, one unsettling question began to circulate among insiders and fans alike. If this was what someone was willing to say out loud, on camera, for millions to hear, what had been so serious that it finally forced the marriage to collapse after years of holding together? And more chilling still, who else knew and stayed quiet, while everything unraveled behind closed doors? The final shift didn't come with a post, a video, or a statement. It came with movement. Quiet, irreversible movement that insiders say confirmed everything the public had been debating in fragments. According to sources close to the situation, a decisive action was taken behind the scenes that made one thing unmistakably clear. Whatever had been uncovered was serious enough that there was no path back, no spin strong enough to undo it. Legal filings began circulating privately before anyone saw a headline. Not dramatic, not explosive, but surgical. Clauses tightened. Boundaries formalized. Entire sections devoted to protection, separation, and long-term control of narrative exposure. Those who caught wind of the details described them as unusually firm, the kind of language used when trust hasn't just been broken, but permanently invalidated. This wasn't about saving face. It was about ending risk. At the same time, the household dynamic reportedly collapsed into silence. Not coldness. Absence. Separate worlds operating under the same roof, until that roof itself became unnecessary. Insiders say the emotional weight reached a point where continuing to coexist was more damaging than walking away. The marriage wasn't ended in anger. It was ended in clarity. And clarity, in this case, was devastating. Then the internet noticed something else. A sudden purge. Photos archived. Mentions erased. Long-standing public connections quietly dissolved without explanation. Fans who had been tracking every move saw the pattern instantly. This wasn't coincidence. This was cleanup. Digital traces removed with the precision of someone who knew exactly what needed to disappear and why. As speculation reignited, a new layer of fallout emerged. Business relationships began shifting. Partners distanced themselves. Statements that had once been automatic suddenly required review. According to industry insiders, the concern wasn't scandal fatigue. It was liability. No one wanted to be adjacent to a story that was still evolving, especially one carrying implications no one fully understood yet. Meanwhile, the online personality went silent. That silence was more unsettling than anything said before. No hints. No teasers. No escalation. Just nothing. Viewers who had been bracing for another drop found themselves refreshing feeds, waiting for the next shoe to fall. Insiders suggest the pause wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Because by this point, the story no longer needed amplification. It was sustaining itself. Behind the scenes, whispers grew darker. Not louder. More specific. Conversations shifted from "did this happen" to "how long was this managed?" From "who's responsible" to "who helped?" According to sources, that was the most dangerous phase of all. When curiosity turns inward and people start questioning their own proximity to something they didn't want to examine too closely. The mogul's inner circle reportedly solidified around one priority: protection of the next generation. Every decision, every silence, every legal maneuver framed around preventing long-term damage rather than winning public sympathy. That choice alone changed how many insiders viewed the situation. This wasn't avoidance. It was containment. Public opinion, however, refused to settle. Some fans demanded transparency. Others begged for restraint. Commentators argued endlessly about ethics, responsibility, and the cost of speculation. But beneath all of it was a shared unease. The sense that something deeply uncomfortable had been brushed against, but not fully revealed. And that discomfort lingered. Then came the final confirmation, subtle but unmistakable. A document surfaced. Not leaked publicly, but acknowledged through secondary channels. Redacted. Limited. Enough to signal that formal steps had been taken that could never be undone. Those who understood the language knew immediately what it meant. The story wasn't being fought. It was being closed. That single development reframed everything. The lack of denial. The absence of countersuits. The careful silence. It all snapped into focus. Insiders say that's when even the most skeptical observers stopped asking whether the split was justified and started asking how long it had taken to reach this point. As days passed, the volume dropped, but the weight increased. The scandal stopped trending, not because it was resolved, but because it had settled into something heavier than outrage. It became a cautionary tale whispered in industry spaces. A reminder of how quickly private boundaries can blur under power, proximity, and unchecked familiarity. And how devastating the consequences are when they do. The individuals at the center retreated in different ways. One into focus and control. One into isolation and recalibration. One into silence that may never fully lift. According to insiders, there will be no dramatic tell-all, no explosive final reveal. Not because there isn't more, but because the choice has been made to let actions speak louder than words. And that choice may be the most damning detail of all. Because in a world where everything is moneized, exposed, and dissected, choosing restraint over spectacle sends a message far more chilling than any allegation ever could. It suggests the truth is heavy enough to be carried privately, without needing public validation. Those closest to the situation believe this chapter is closed, but not forgotten. The ripple effects will continue quietly, shaping decisions, relationships, and perceptions long after the internet moves on to the next outrage. Careers will adjust. Circles will shrink. Trust will be rationed carefully, if at all. And while the public may never know every detail, one thing is undeniable. The split wasn't random. It wasn't sudden. And it wasn't about growing apart. It was about a line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. And everyone involved knows it. If you're still here, understand this. You're not just watching a story, you're standing inside a moment that people will reference for years without ever fully explaining. This is the kind of fallout that doesn't end with headlines, it lingers, reshapes narratives, and quietly changes how power, family, and silence are understood in the spotlight. And once the conversation moves on, the people who weren't paying attention will never catch up. This is why you cannot disengage now. Every like pushes this conversation, where it can't be quietly buried. Every comment keeps the pressure on the parts of the story no one wants to revisit. And subscribing isn't just about notifications, it's about staying ahead of what's next, because the next shift won't come with sirens. It'll come subtly, and by the time it's obvious, it'll already be too late to trace back. This channel exists for the details that slip through cracks, the moments others rush past, and the silences that say more than any statement ever could. If you leave now, you'll only hear about what happens next through fragments and second-hand takes. If you stay, you'll see how the pieces connect in real time. So don't scroll. Don't assume this is over. Engage now, while it still matters. Because stories like this don't disappear, they resurface. And when they do, you'll want to remember that you were already here when everything started to make sense.